Hey guys, tonight we take a very slow, very sideways stroll into one of the noisiest, messiest corners of ancient mythology, where grape juice leads to disaster and drama wears a leopard print toga. You're about to drop in on the story of Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, pleasure, and theater, and let's just say, he doesn't get invited to a lot of reunions. You're standing in the warm dusk of a dusty Mediterranean town. Stone streets, olive for days, and some questionable hygiene standards. The air smells like fermenting fruit and distant arguments. Somewhere nearby, a flute trills off-key. And yes, someone just screamed, "I am the vine!" at full volume. You don't know it yet, but Dionysus is here. And you probably won't survive this party. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing the whole sleepy map light up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't meet Dionysus so much as feel him. The music gets louder, the crowd gets looser, and suddenly you're surrounded by ivy and dancers, and someone's thrust a goblet of suspiciously frothy liquid into your hand. There's a man in the center of it all, barefoot, golden crowned, with the relaxed confidence of someone who never has to clean up after himself. That's him, the one with the wine-stained lips and a personality made of glitter and sleep deprivation. He's technically a god, but nobody really treats him like the others. Zeus's father gets temples. Athena gets respect. Dionysus? Dionysus gets side-eye and noise complaints. See, most Greek gods are pretty clear-cut. They have domains: war, wisdom, love. Dionysus? His domain is the chaos that happens when domains fall apart. Wine, madness, inspiration. And yes, parties so intense the floors collapse. He doesn't host them. He shows up uninvited. And suddenly everyone's waking up in a vineyard with no sandals. You're at one such gathering right now. It began as a harvest celebration. A few friends thanking Demeter for the grain. Then Dionysus appeared with his entourage. A rotating crew of satyrs, half-human, all-problem, maenads, ecstatic women in a trance, and a donkey with very questionable boundaries. They arrived singing. And they don't stop. Not when the townsfolk ask nicely. Not when someone gently suggests maybe now is a good time to take the music down a notch. Dionysus just laughs and refills everyone's cup. The wine keeps flowing, from amphorae, from fountains, at one point from a hollow tree. And then he asks you to dance. You do, badly, but he doesn't care. Nobody does. The rhythm takes over. People who haven't spoken to their neighbors in years are now hugging under the stars. Someone's wearing a watermelon rind as a helmet. It's beautiful, ridiculous, and entirely too loud. Historians still argue whether Dionysus' arrival signaled liberation or destruction. Was he the god who gave voice to the silenced, or the one who unhinged society's last stable door? You're beginning to suspect the answer is both. The party continues into the next morning. Not just metaphorically, literally. The sun comes up, and people are still dancing. Dionysus is nowhere to be seen. Neither is your left sandal. A goat is chewing on your tunic. You blink, dazed. Around you, the town lies in various states of disrepair and personal regret. The mayor steps out her crumbling home, surveys the chaos, and mutters something like, "That's the third time this month." Then she announces, with the exhaustive finality of someone who has tried and failed to be diplomatic, that Dionysus is now officially banned from public gatherings. Again, you'd think that would stop him. It doesn't. Being banned only makes him more mythically attractive. He becomes a patron of fringe spaces, forests, caves, late-night taverns. Anywhere respectable people won't follow. There's a fringe theory, whispered in very niche classics departments, that Dionysus represents a return of the repressed. The things polite society pretends not to want. Joy without control. Grief with mascara. The voice in your head that says, just one more drink, even as your rational side is Googling hangover cures. But it's not just chaos. It's catharsis. The Greeks had a word for it. Ecstasis. Literally, standing outside yourself. A kind of temporary vacation from your own identity. That's what Dionysus offers. Not just wine, but transformation. And okay, sometimes it gets messy. Like turning a city square into a goat orgy messy. But there's meaning in the madness. Even the other gods aren't quite sure what to do with him. Hera, Zeus's wife, tried to have him destroyed as a baby. Twice. Once by sending titans to tear him apart, they failed. Obviously, he got better. And again by driving his caretakers mad. But Dionysus just kept coming back, like a hangover or glitter in your carpet. Eventually, Zeus had to officially declare him divine. But by then, Dionysus had already gone rogue, traveling the world, spreading the cult of wine, and picking up new followers wherever he went. Always dancing. Always just a little bit too much. And you're still recovering from that first party. Still trying to figure out what just happened. Someone's carved a statue of Dionysus out of leftover cheese. Someone else is sleeping in a barrel. The donkey is now mayor. The townsfolk begin the slow, painful process of pretending it never happened. But you remember, because when Dionysus passes through, he leaves something behind. Not just empty goblets and broken lyres, but a whisper in your mind, a tilt in your perspective, a tiny crack in the wall of your everyday routine. The part of you that wants to feel alive, even if it's inconvenient. And maybe, just maybe, you understand why people keep banning him. Not because they hate him, but because deep down, they know how easy it is to fall under his spell. You're still picking grape skins out of your hair when you end up on Naxos. No one tells you how you got here. It's that kind of story now. 1 minute you're asleep under a fig tree. The next you're blinking into sunlight on an island that smells like salt, time, and ancient regret. Naxos, the sprawling jewel of the Cyclades, known for marble, myth, and one fairly unfortunate winery disaster. Dionysus, predictably, is already here. He's standing at the edge of a steep terrace, overlooking the sea, a cup in one hand, a vine creeping up the other like it's trying to propose. His followers, more of those relentless barefoot revelers, are fanning out through the hills, planting grapevines in unlikely places. Side of a cliff? Perfect. Crumbling temple wall? Why not? A confused shepherd's hat? Sure. This, you're told, is where Dionysus first teaches mortals the secret of fermentation. How to take a grape, that simple, sun-fed fruit, and turn it into something divine. He shows them how to crush the fruit, how to store it, how to wait. And then, finally, how to drink it and forget whatever they were worried about before. It's beautiful for about 10 minutes. See, no one really considers dosage. Dionysus, for all his divine showmanship, doesn't hand out a pamphlet called How Not to Black Out on Sacred Wine. The people of Naxos don't sip. They chug. They invent a whole festival just to celebrate the fact that they got barrels of this new miracle drink. And soon, there are rumors of villagers waking up in strange places. Olive trees, boats that aren't theirs, a cow's personal space. You stumble into a symposium that's gone off the rails. Instead of dignified conversation and Plato-esque philosophizing, someone is giving an impromptu monologue about how the moon is clearly mocking him. A woman is trying to recite poetry, but keeps hiccuping between verses. Someone else is using a philosophical scroll as a coaster. The grapes, it turns out, may have been over-fermented, or cursed, or both. Historical records, what's left of them, suggest that the island did become a hub for early wine production. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient wine presses nestled into the rock. But scholars still debate whether the cult of Dionysus sparked this boom, or simply latched onto it like ivy around a drainpipe. Some even argue that Dionysus wasn't a god at all, but a person, maybe a charismatic vineyard owner, who took branding way too far. Either way, the effects are tangible. More wine equals more parties. More parties equal more problems. A local nobleman tries to institute a curfew. Dionysus responds by turning his toga into a magic cloak that lets him vanish into mist just to prove a point. The nobleman never tries that again. And you, ever the accidental tourist, get swept into one of Dionysus' vineyard rituals. You're handed a bunch of grapes still warm from the sun, then encouraged to stomp them barefoot in a marble basin. The juice runs red and sticky between your toes, staining the stone like some forgotten sacrificial rite. Above you, the sky swirls orange and gold. It smells like sugar and heat, and a decision you'll regret by nightfall. The dancing begins. Of course it does. Dionysus leads a first step, a kind of bouncing swirl that makes zero sense, but everyone copies it anyway. Drums beat from somewhere you can't see. Flutes wind their way into the chaos. A satyr throws a fig at your head. It feels vaguely like affection. Then someone trips and takes out a whole row of amphorae. Wine floods down the hillside. People slip. Someone yells that the grapes are crying. Someone else tries to drink directly from the soil. Dionysus just laughs, wild and delighted, and then casually turns a broken cup into a gold chalice, because subtlety is for other gods. And here's where it gets weird, as if it wasn't already. You start noticing little things, like how the vines around Dionysus seem to move, how his shadow sometimes has horns, how, in the flickering light of torches, his face seems to shift. Young, old, joyful, furious. It's said he contains opposites. The bringer of joy, the dealer of madness. The party that never ends, an inevitable crash that follows. A local elder leans in close to you and whispers, "The wine isn't for pleasure, it's for forgetting. That's why he made it." Forget what? You ask. But the elder only smiles, sad and wide-eyed, and pours himself another drink. You fall asleep on a pile of discarded reeds. You dream of vines growing from your fingertips, of laughter echoing from underground cellars, of Dionysus standing atop the sea, flinging goblets into the waves like he's trying to intoxicate the ocean. When you wake, the island is silent. The vineyards are empty. The party, like always, has vanished. In its place, hangovers, broken sandals, and a new law carved into stone by the village square. It reads, "No fermenting after sundown." A noble effort. Doomed, of course. But you get it now. Dionysus doesn't teach moderation. He teaches surrender. And on Naxos, you learn what happens when a little knowledge and a lot of wine go a long, long way in the wrong direction. You find yourself on a ship, not on purpose. Mind you, one moment, you're dozing on a beach towel woven from goat wool. The next, your hands are tied behind your back with rope that smells like old fish. The ship creaks around you, wooden, sun-bleached, and very much not headed for any spa town. A sailor leers at you. Another pokes you with a paddle. And you're really starting to think this adventure is getting way out of hand. You're not the only one who got scooped up. Standing not far from you, calm, barefoot, and still somehow managing to look mildly amused, is a familiar figure in a loose, wine-colored robe. Dionysus. The pirates have kidnapped him too. Only, he doesn't seem all that bothered, which is the first red flag. The pirates, Tyrrhenians, if the grumbling dialect is any clue, think they've captured a rich young noble. Someone's cousin, maybe, a prince traveling incognito. They nudge each other, giggling about the ransom they'll demand. They're picturing gold, horses, maybe even one of those fancy bronze bathtubs. What they've actually captured is a god. You'd warn them if your mouth wasn't full of gag cloth and your dignity wasn't tied to the mast. The ship cuts through the blue Aegean like a butter knife. Dionysus stays perfectly serene, smiling as though this is all some hilarious misunderstanding. One of the pirates hands him a crust of bread. He declines. Another tries to pat him down for coins and suddenly screams, clutching a hand covered in ivy burns. The others laugh. You do not. Then the strange things start. First, the smell. Sweet, thick, like fermented honey and crushed herbs. It oozes from below deck. The barrels of drinking water, now bubbling with wine. The pirates cheer, but you notice they drink a little too much, a little too fast. Their voices slur. Their laughter turns frantic. Second, the ropes around you melt away. Literally, like soft cheese in the sun. You blink, rub your wrists, and look up to find Dionysus watching you with that annoying, mysterious calm. You should probably stand back, he says, as though you've been given a weather advisory and not a supernatural warning. Then the vines come. They erupt from the floorboards, fast, curling, thick. Ivy shoots coil up the mast. Grapevines slither along the oars, locking them in place. The wood groans. A pirate tries to draw his sword and finds it stuck to a cluster of grapes. Another screams that the rudder has turned into a snake. He's not wrong. That's definitely a snake. Dionysus grows taller, or maybe the air just shimmers around him. Either way, you suddenly know you're looking at something older than this ship, older than these waters, older than fear. His face splits into a grin both joyful and utterly feral. His eyes flicker gold. And then chaos. The pirates try to flee. They leap overboard, paddling with arms and curses. But before they hit the water, they begin to twist. Their legs merge. Their arms shorten. Their skin darkens to sleek, wet gray. One by one, they turn into dolphins. Not poetic dolphins. Not adorable, splashy mascots. Real confused, probably still a little drunk dolphins. You can hear them squeak in disbelief. One tries to climb back aboard and flops instead onto a deck slick with grape juice. You almost feel bad for them. Almost. Because this is the price of disrespect. The wrath of the wine god. Soft-edged, grape-scented vengeance. The ship rights itself. The vines loosen. Dionysus winks at you. They'll be fine, he says, gesturing at the dolphins now circling the ship. Much better swimmers now. You stare at the horizon, trying to process what just happened. You're not sure if you feel awe, nausea, or just a desperate need for a snack. Maybe all three. This tale, yes, it's real, yes, it shows up in ancient sources, became one of Dionysus' greatest hits. Art, vase paintings, mosaics, they all love this moment. Scholars debate whether it was a moral parable, don't mess with strangers, a symbol of transformation, from man to beast, from sin to swim, or just a flex. Look, Dionysus seems to say, I don't have to scream, I don't have to rage. I'll just reassign your taxonomy. There's also a fringe theory that these dolphins were then blessed by Dionysus to become his messengers, that their song still carries divine messages across the sea, whispering strange truths to lost sailors. It's a nice thought, especially when one of them chirps at you and flips in the air like it's trying to show off. And this is classic Dionysus. He doesn't just punish. He transforms. He doesn't explode with fury. He rearranges reality in your general direction until you're left questioning your own species. You sail the rest of the day in silence. No crew, no captain, just Dionysus, lounging against the stern, plucking a grape from his sleeve and tossing to the wind. The ship moves without sails, guided, you assume, by divine smugness. When you finally wash ashore, again, unclear how, you find yourself near a quiet cove. The rocks are warm. The sky is cloudless. Dionysus is already walking away barefoot, leaving no print behind. And you hear a dolphin chirp somewhere in the waves and wonder, for just a moment, if you're still entirely human. You barely recover from your impromptu dolphin cruise when you stumble into Thebes. It's not exactly a tourist trap, unless you count the actual traps hidden in its architecture. Thebes is proud, polished, paranoid. Tall walls, taller egos. The kind of place where people speak in declarations rather than sentences. And perched at the very top of this overly serious city is King Pentheus, a man who reads every law scroll twice and laughs only once a year. Which is unfortunate, because Dionysus just walked into town, not with fanfare, not with wine pouring from the heavens. No, Dionysus arrives in disguise, like he often does, dressed as a foreign priest, barefoot, calm, and humming a tune with too many notes. He claims to bring news of a new god, one who grants joy, revelry, and relief from pain. A god who demands festivals, music, and the occasional ecstatic sprint through the forest wearing leopard print. Pentheus is not amused. To him, this reeks of cult behavior, madness, chaos, and, worst of all, unregulated partying. He questions the stranger. Where did you come from? Who sent you? Why are women leaving their homes to follow this so-called god into the mountains? Dionysus smiles. The king fumes. And so, with all the arrogance of a man who's never danced offbeat in his life, Pentheus orders the priest imprisoned. Here's where it gets awkward, because imprisoning a god, even one in disguise, tend to go poorly. By the time the guards finish clanking shut the cell door, The chains have already slipped off. Vines sprout through the stone walls. A faint drumming echoes in the distance. When the king checks on his prisoner, the cell is empty, except for a faint scent of myrrh and what might be lavender incense, because of course Dionysus would make his escape smell like a luxury bath product. The women of Thebes, meanwhile, have left the city. They're up on Mount Cithaeron, dancing barefoot, hair unbound, wearing nothing but animal skins and blissful expressions. These are the Maenads Dionysus devoted. The name means raving ones, but don't be fooled. They're not just party girls. They're wholly possessed and fiercely powerful. And they're not coming down for dinner. This drives Pentheus wild. His authority is melting faster than cheese on a Corinthian windowsill. The women have abandoned their looms, their children, their kitchens. They're chanting. They're climbing trees. One of them reportedly turned a lion into a house cat. Whether that's metaphor or actual feline shrinkage, historians still argue. So Pentheus does what insecure rulers always do. He doubles down. He decides to spy on them, disguised in women's clothing. Yes, you heard that right. Pentheus allows Dionysus, who is clearly not even trying to hide the smirk anymore, to lead him up the mountain. The king wears a wig. He lifts his toga with the grace of a man who has never worn anything unventilated before. You follow behind at a safe distance, mostly because you do not want to get wine magicked into a shrub. Dionysus gestures for silence. You peek through the trees. And there they are, the Maenads, glowing in the firelight, moving in rhythm with no music you can hear. They're twirling, singing, weaving vines into crowns. One of them summons a stream from a rock with a single touch. Another milks a tree. A third catches a wild hare mid-leap, kisses it on the nose, and releases it again. This isn't just dancing. It's divine possession. And Pentheus, King Law and Order, is absolutely mesmerized. So mesmerized, in fact, that he climbs a tree for a better look. This is a mistake. Because in the eyes of the Maenads, that's no king in drag. That's a threat hiding in the trees. A spy. A hunter. A wild beast in disguise. And what do Maenads do with wild beasts? They tear them apart. The story darkens here. The women, in their divine frenzy, pull Pentheus down. His robes rip. His wig falls. But it's too late. They don't recognize him. In some versions, it's his own mother, Agave, who delivers the final blow. Believing she's slain a lion, she only realizes her mistake when the trance ends and she's holding her son's head, not a trophy. Brutal, yes. But remember, this isn't just gore for drama's sake. This is myth at full volume. A cautionary tale wrapped in vine leaves and hallucinations. You sit at the base of the mountain as the sun rises. Dionysus, once again barefoot and unbothered, sits beside you. He pours a little wine into the dirt. Pentheus didn't believe, he says quietly. And when belief dies, so does mercy. There's a historical kernel in all this. Scholars debate whether the Pentheus legend masks a real clash between old and new religions in ancient Greece, a struggle between structured civic worship and wilder, ecstatic mystery cults. Some believe Dionysus' worship was imported from Thrace or the East, shaking up the traditional Greek pantheon. Others think he's been part of the mythos from the start, just inconveniently different. And then there's the fringe view, that Pentheus wasn't real but a metaphor, a stand-in for rationality, order, and repression, torn to shreds by the primal forces he couldn't control. Either way, Thebes doesn't recover easily. The people build shrines. They whisper prayers. They no longer scoff at ivy creeping up their doors. And Dionysus? He leaves. Not with triumph. Not with malice. Just with the quiet satisfaction of a god whose boundaries have been restored. You follow him down the mountain path, the morning dew sticking to your feet. The trees seem quieter now. The world a little softer. And as the light turns golden, you wonder, not for the first time, if belief isn't just about temples or rituals, but about surrendering to what you can't fully explain. You wake up in a field of crushed grape skins. It's not the worst place you've woken up. Remember the ship, the vines, the dolphin noises. But it's definitely not the spa weekend you were hoping for. Your tunic smells like a mix of fermentation and regret. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the unmistakable sound of someone playing panpipes badly. Dionysus, of course, is already awake. He's lounging beneath an olive tree, feeding olives to a lynx the size of a very smug coffee table. It purrs when he scratches behind its ear. You try not to look surprised. Or delicious. Ready to keep moving? He asks, as if this has all been a gentle stroll through mildly cursed vineyards. You nod, even though your legs feel like they've aged a decade and your sandals have started developing a personality of their own. Today's stop? Naxos, a sunny island, famously beautiful, with white cliffs that tumble into seas bluer than any poet deserves. The beaches are soft, the breeze smells like lemon blossoms, and for a second you actually relax. No pirates, no kings, no half-possessed dance mobs. That's when you meet her. She's curled up on the sand, barefoot, wrapped in a cloak the color of burnt clay. Her name is Ariadne, and you know her story, at least the version you were taught. The brave daughter of King Minos, the one who helped Theseus navigate the labyrinth, who gave him the thread, who stood beside him after he killed the Minotaur, and who, in return, was abandoned, left on this island, asleep while his ship sailed away. You glance at Dionysus. He's already moving toward her. What happens next is something out of a myth, because, well, it is, but there's no lightning bolt, no grand celestial orchestra. Dionysus kneels beside Ariadne, touches her cheek, and she wakes up like she was expecting him, as if she's always been expecting him. They speak without words. You don't understand how, but you feel it. Something ancient and inevitable unfolding in front of you. A union not of conquest, but of kindred wildness. He takes her hand. He makes her his wife. And the island rejoices. Literally. Vines bloom in the sand. The air grows warmer. The animals gather in pairs, and not in a flood prep way, but more like they're here for the open bar. Some versions of the story claim Dionysus fell in love with her at first sight. Others suggest he was sent by the gods to rescue her from despair. There's even a fragment that says she became immortal, not because she asked for it, but because the world needed her to be. Historians still argue whether Ariadne's marriage was a symbol of redemption, a romantic retcon to clean up Theseus' mess, or a rare example of female agency wrapped in divine reward. Whatever the truth, she gets more respect here than she ever did in Athens. They celebrate all night. You do your best to join in, but your dance moves still look like a polite seizure. Nobody minds. There's wine, of course, pour from amphorae that refill themselves. There's music, played by satyrs who argue about tempo even as they stomp perfect rhythms. And there's food, which you try not to question, even when the cheese starts whispering affirmations. At some point, you look up and see a crown in the sky. It sparkles, 7 stars arcing like a tiara above the sea. They say Dionysus threw Ariadne's wedding wreath into the heavens, and it became the constellation Corona Borealis. You squint, and there it is, a faint shimmer like joy made visible. This, you realize, is a different side of Dionysus. Not the punisher, not the prankster, but the lover, the redeemer, the god who picks up what others leave behind and makes it glorious. It's easy to forget with all the madness of metamorphosis that Dionysus is also a god of healing, not in the clean, surgical sense, but in the wild, unpredictable way that joy can mend a soul faster than logic ever could. He doesn't erase pain. He dances with it and teaches you to do the same. As the fire dies down and the satyrs snore in loose piles, you lie back on the sand. The sea sighs beside you. A grape rolls lazily from your palm. You're too tired to care. Ariadne is already asleep again, but this time she's not alone. Dionysus curls beside her, arm draped across her shoulder, and for once, just once, his expression is entirely unguarded. No riddles, no smirks, just peace. There's a fringe theory, whispered by fringe scholars with fringe beards, that Dionysus wasn't always meant to be a god of chaos, that he began as a fertility spirit, a bringer of bounty and love, only later warped by centuries of misinterpretation, that deep down beneath the madness, he is still that guardian of joy. It's a comforting idea, especially as you drift off, the stars humming lullabies above you. You dream of vines curling into constellations, of thread that never ends, of labyrinths that lead not to monsters, but to meadows. And when you wake, salt on your lips, sand in your ear, you think, just for a second, that you hear Ariadne laughing. Not because she was saved, but because she chose to stay. You hitch a ride on a cart full of figs. Not exactly glamorous, but after the wedding on Naxos and the slow, dreamy hangover of moonlit dancing, it's a welcome shift. The donkey pulling you smells like he knows secrets. Dionysus, meanwhile, walks ahead barefoot, humming a tune that bends the air around it like heat above a bonfire. Your next stop? Athens. But not just the marble and museums Athens you've seen in postcards or museum models. This is the early city, alive with contradictions. Streets of philosophy and sewage. Sacred temples perched just uphill from taverns full of questionable stew. There's always a debate in progress. Always someone trying to explain the universe with nothing but geometry and a fig tart. Dionysus isn't here for a debate, though. He's here for theater. Yes, theater. Because in Athens, Dionysus is worshipped not just with wine and revelry, but with drama. Literal drama. Masked actors, chorus lines, the whole amphitheater deal. And it's not a small sideshow. The Festival of Dionysia is the event. Think Coachella meets the Oscars, with just a pinch of goat sacrifice. You follow him into the city, past towering statues and alleyways bursting with fish guts. A flurry of carpenters and poets are prepping for the big week. Costumes are being stitched. Scripts are being shouted. Someone's trying to train a goat to walk in a circle without eating the stage. Tragedy. Dionysus says with a sigh and a grin, it's how they remember things. See, the Greeks believed that storytelling could be divine, that speaking pain aloud gave it shape, that laughter could purify. And Dionysus, of all gods, knew how fragile the mind could be. After all, his followers were often those frayed by grief or love or the unbearable weight of just existing. The theater wasn't just entertainment. It was medicine. It was madness with script. And this week, the city is packed with playwrights. Sophocles, Euripides, Aeschylus, all nervously rehearsing their tragedies and hoping for first prize, a crown of ivy and eternal bragging rights. You snag a spot in the crowd. The stone seats are hot from the sun, and the woman next to you is eating olives like it's a full-contact sport. The first play begins. It's intense. A son murders his mother. A queen mourns her husband. A chorus moans in unison, shifting like one giant, emotionally overworked sea anemone. People cry. People cheer. One guy faints. And Dionysus? He's thrilled, because this isn't just worship. This is catharsis, the purging of emotion, the kind of release that keeps cities from crumbling and minds from snapping. There's a historical kernel to all this. The Athenian tragedy competitions, known as the Dionysia, really were religious events. Playwrights wrote trilogies of tragedies and one satyr play, basically ancient Greek sketch comedy. The plays were judged by citizens. Victories were sacred. And all of it was done to honor the god who, paradoxically, taught humans how to hold madness without being consumed by it. But as always, not everyone approved. Some philosophers, cough Plato cough, believed theater stirred the emotions too much, that it misled the soul, that it weakened reason. And yes, historians still argue whether the Dionysia reinforced civic unity or unleashed barely contained chaos beneath the marble surface of democracy. Meanwhile, on the fringes of town, a more secretive ritual unfolds. You sneak away from the stage, temporarily don't worry, and follow a trail of ivy-covered torches. You end up in a grove lit only by moonlight and soft chanting. These are Dionysus mystery cults. Less public theater, more private transformation. A woman leads you in. Her eyes are kind, but somewhere else, she anoints your forehead with oil. You feel the ground pulse under your bare feet. The mysteries weren't written down. Still aren't. They involved wine, symbols, sometimes reenactments of death and rebirth. People went in as one version of themselves and came out a little different, a little more unbuttoned, a little more aware of what lies behind the curtain of logic. Some scholars suggest these rituals mimic the seasonal cycle. Grapes crushed, wine fermented, spring reborn. Others insist it was about confronting death, dissolving ego, and becoming one with the god, even if only for a moment. There's even a fringe theory that early psychological healing techniques were buried in these rites, disguised as divine madness. You emerge later into the night, the stars winking as if they know something you don't. Back at the theater, the satyr play is underway. Dancers in floppy masks mocking everything that came before. Even tragedy needs a punchline. Dionysus finds you, hands you a cup. You sip. It's cool and sharp and sweet. You don't know if it's wine or something else. You survived, he says. For now. You blink. Is this it? He grins. Not even close. Because you're only just beginning to see how many versions of this god there are. The festival patron. The emotional surgeon. The one who heals by cracking the show wide open. And somewhere, just beneath your ribs, you feel something stir. Something like music. Something like possibility. The olive cart driver appears again, as if summoned. You climb aboard. Dionysus whistles once, and the donkey trots forward like he's heard that tune before. As the city fades behind you, the stars overhead shimmer in their ancient formation. You don't know where you're going next, but the road smells faintly of crushed time and new wine. And you're beginning to suspect that's how all good stories begin. The road narrows as you leave Athens, winding into the mountains like a thread stitched through crumbling marble. The air turns cooler. The scent of crushed grapes is replaced by pine needles, whetstone, and distant campfire smoke. You ride in silence for a while, until Dionysus tosses you a chunk of honeycomb and says, "You ever crash a party twice?" You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Some mortals never learn. You're heading toward a kingdom called Thebes. Sound familiar? It should. This is where Dionysus was born. Or tried to be. Remember Semele? The mortal mother, who got vaporized by Zeus' full divine wattage? Thebes was her hometown. And her sisters? Yeah, they were the first to say she lied about the whole thing. That Dionysus wasn't real. That Semele made it up to cover some scandal. He hasn't forgotten. Thebes has grown since then. Brick houses, temples, gossip markets where old women argue about olive prices while casually cursing each other's sons. But beneath the surface, there's something tight and bitter in the air. The king, Pentheus, rules with a sandal made of anxiety and a stick carved from boredom. He's very into order and structure and laws that do not involve animal masks. He does not like Dionysus, which is a problem because Dionysus has arrived, and he's wearing eyeliner. You follow him into the city. People stare, whisper, some bow, others scoff, but the god pays no mind. He walks with the relaxed arrogance of someone who knows the punchline before the setup even lands. He's come not just to be acknowledged, but to challenge a kingdom that pretends he doesn't exist. Pentheus, of course, is not having it. The king calls Dionysus a fraud, a fake, a corrupter of women, a threat to civic virtue, and most of all, annoying. He forbids the worship of Dionysus, declares his rituals illegal, and starts arresting followers who so much as hum a backseat tune in public. Dionysus smiles. That's never good. You'd think things would calm down after that, but instead they spiral. Women start disappearing into the hills. Not vanishing, exactly, just leaving, abandoning looms and husbands and polite society for forests, where they join backseat rites far from city walls. They dance, chant, and wear fawn skins. They drink deeply. They forget the roles they were handed and become something else, something freer. Historians still argue whether this represents a feminist uprising, a cautionary tale, or the ancient Greek equivalent of burning your toga and joining a drum circle. Either way, the women of Thebes are done with table manners. Pentheus grows furious. He wants proof of the madness. So when Dionysus, disguised as a beautiful stranger, because of course he does, offers to guide the king into the hills to spy on the women, Pentheus agrees. Big mistake. This is where things go off the rails. Dionysus convinces Pentheus to dress as a woman, to blend in, he says. And somehow, the king agrees. Wears a wig, smears on some coal, hikes up a borrowed dress, and teeters off into the trees. You follow, watching from the shadows. At first, it's almost funny. The king trying to tiptoe like a nymph. But the women, lost in trance and frenzy, don't see a man in drag. They see a threat. And in the way of ancient myths, things turn brutal fast. Pentheus is torn apart by the women, literally, and leading the frenzy, his own mother, Agave, she doesn't recognize him, thinks he's a wild animal. Only afterward does the illusion fade. Only when she cradles his head does she realize what she's done. Dionysus stands at the edge of it all, quiet, not gloating, not regretful, just still. Some say this was vengeance. Others say it was justice. A few argue it was necessary, a lesson in humility for a king too arrogant to honor what he didn't understand. Fringe scholars whisper that Pentheus was always doomed, that gods like Dionysus exist to reveal what's already broken, not to break it themselves. You step away from the scene. Your legs shake. This isn't the gentle god who handed you wine and watched the stars with Ariadne. This is a deeper version. The part of Dionysus that doesn't ask for belief, but demands it, who reminds mortals that denying truth doesn't make it disappear, that you can't silence chaos by declaring it illegal. Back in Thebes, no one sings. The women return to their homes, haunted. The temples stay dark. A city once proud now echoes with the weight of unspoken grief. Dionysus doesn't stay long. You travel with him into the hills. The stars seem colder now, like they've watched too many tragedies to flinch anymore. Dionysus says nothing for miles. Eventually he speaks. Mortals want control, he murmurs, but they forget what they are. You ask what that is. He doesn't answer, just hands you another cup and walks on. Later, beside a fire built with olive branches and laurel, you sit quietly and wonder, is he cruel or is he honest? Because sometimes they're the same. You sleep under the stars at night, curled in a borrowed cloak that smells faintly of thyme, charcoal, and someone else's memories. Somewhere near your ear, a cicada chirps like it's been paid to perform. Dionysus doesn't sleep, of course. He hums instead, a low, circular melody that makes the air shimmer like heat off a summer road. When dawn comes, you're already awake, staring at the sky like it owes you answers. The next place he takes you isn't marked on any map. It's not a city or a sacred grove. It's a place between things. Part cave, part theater, part echo. You have to duck through a curtain of vines and slide down a slope of damp moss just to reach it. Inside, it's cooler than expected. You hear dripping water, feel limestone beneath your palms. Dionysus gestures to the space like a magician revealing the world's saddest secret. This, he says, is where they put me. You blink. Put you? He nods. When I wasn't invited, this is where it gets weird. And yes, weirder than a donkey cart full of figs or a cross-dressing king shredded by dancing women. Because apparently at one point, the other Olympian gods tried to sideline Dionysus entirely. Just pretend he didn't exist. Like that uncle who shows up at weddings with a flute and 5 cats. Why? Well, historians still argue whether it was because he wasn't born on Olympus, because of his mortal blood, or because he brought a kind of worship that didn't sit well with polished marble and thunderbolts. His rituals were loud, messy, female-led, not civilized. And so, for a while, Dionysus was kept out of the pantheon. No seat at the immortal table. No golden nameplate on Mount Olympus. Just festivals in the hills and whispers behind temple walls. You sit with that a moment, with the idea of a god being ghosted. This place, this cave, it's a symbol of that exclusion. Followers still came here, in secret, to worship, to pour wine into the soil and chant his name, to remind him he was remembered, even when the Big 12 pretended otherwise. You imagine them here. Young girls with wild hair and no shoes, old men with breath that smell like raisins, all holding hands and singing into the dark, not because they were told to, but because they felt it, that low, dangerous thrum of wildness that Dionysus always brings, the invitation to feel too much, to break the polite silence. It's a funny thing. You can build temples and sculpt statues, but sometimes a cave says more. You ask if he ever minded being left out. He smiles, But it's not the usual grin. It's quieter, almost tired. I had my own parties, he says. Still, there's a flicker there, a memory of being cast aside, of being worshipped by the broken and barefoot, while the other gods lounge in golden halls, sipping nectar and pretending chaos didn't exist. Ironically, this same rejection led to one of his most dramatic returns, because eventually he was invited back, but not with a polite scroll and a handshake. Oh no, the myths tell of the moment when Dionysus walked back into Olympus not like a beggar, but like a storm, charioted by leopards, trailing ivy and thunder, surrounded by maenads and madness. A god not just returned, but reclaimed. There's an actual historical precedent here. 2. Dionysus' official place among the Olympians was debated for centuries. Some cities honored him early. Others only grudgingly accepted him. And scholars now believe he was a late addition to the traditional pantheon, a symbol of how Greek religion evolved to include the unpredictable and emotional, not just the orderly and heroic. Fringe theory time. One historian claims that Dionysus wasn't just added to Olympus. He replaced Hestia, the goddess of the hearth. That society moved from the safe, enclosed fire to the ecstatic bonfire outside, from domestic comfort to wild transformation. Of course, most classists roll their eyes at this. But hey, it makes for a good campfire story. You rise from the cave. The sun's tilted overhead like it's trying to eavesdrop. Dionysus dusts off his robes and stretches. Ready for a party, he says. You blink. I thought I just left one. He shakes his head. Not that kind of party. You follow him up the slope, back into the open world, where birds gossip in the olive trees, and the wind smells of wild mint. You're not sure where you're going next, but if experience is anything to go by, you should probably brace yourself. Dionysus whistles once, and a cart pulls up, this one pulled by actual leopards. Because of course it is. You climb aboard, and the road unspools ahead like a ribbon tossed by someone slightly tipsy and very dramatic. The cart lurches forward, pulled by 2 spotted leopards who seem entirely unbothered by the laws of physics or taste. Their eyes glint like mischief carved into amber. Dionysus lounges beside you, one sandal kicked off, lazily twirling a grapevine between his fingers. So, he says, you ever hear about Icarius? You haven't. Well, buckle in. It's tragic. And just like that, the scenery shifts. No more sun-drenched hills or Olympian caves. Now you're drifting into a simpler countryside. Flat fields, distant flocks, shepherds leaning on crooks, and arguing about whose goat is the most emotionally available. The kind of place where stories don't begin with thunderbolts or oracles, but with farmers just trying to get through the day without divine intervention, turning their chickens into philosophical metaphors. Icarius was a kind man, a generous one, lived near Athens, raised grapes. The regular kind, not the kind that whispered your deepest insecurities back at you when squished. According to myth, he was one of the first mortals to receive wine directly from Dionysus. Big deal, right? Well, it was Dionysus, in a rare moment of chill mentorship, taught Icarius how to make wine. Real wine, not just fermented grape mush, but the good stuff, complex, subtle, the kind that sings in your spine and makes you write poetry about your neighbor's eyebrows. So Icarius, being generous, shares it, takes the wine to nearby shepherds, offers them a drink. And here's where things go off the rails. Again, these shepherds, completely unacquainted with the concept of intoxication, get absolutely plastered. They've never been drunk before. No framework, no warnings, no responsible goat herding signs with know your limits. Just one sip, then another, and suddenly they're laughing, crying, seeing colors in the air, possibly confessing long-buried secrets to sheep. Here's the twist. They think they've been poisoned. Yep, their minds don't register euphoria. They assume it's a curse, a trick, or some kind of slow-acting spell. So what do? They kill Icarius. Blunt, brutal. They panic, and he pays the price. You glance at Dionysus. He stares into the distance, jaw tight. He loved Icarius, you realize. Maybe not in a romantic sense, though historians still argue about the nature of that bond. But in a sacred one, Icarius honored the gift of wine. He didn't abuse it. He didn't try to control it. He just shared it, and the world punished him for it. You pass a small shrine by the road. Old stones, weather-worn, draped in ivy. Dionysus nods toward it. That's for Erigone, he says softly. Erigone was Icarius' daughter. When she found her father's body, she hanged herself from a tree in despair. And her dog, Mara, ever loyal, leapt off a cliff in grief. Dionysus turned them into constellations. Look up. You can see them on a clear night. Erigone as Virgo, Mara near Canis Major. Quiet stars with noisy backstories. Silent memorials to a kindness gone horribly sideways. You think about that. About how easy it is to misunderstand something new. How wine, this ancient symbol of joy and release, was seen as a threat by those who couldn't comprehend it. How mortals often destroy what they're too frightened to explore. There's a mainstream scholarly take here, that the myth of Icarius represents early cultural anxieties around wine itself. It was, after all, a game changer. It altered consciousness, redefined social rituals, and blurred the boundaries between sacred and profane. Fringe theorists even suggest this myth encodes a warning that any gift from the gods, no matter how divine, comes with consequences if handled with fear. Dionysus is quiet for a long while. Then he mutters, "They named a whole festival after her. You know, the Iora." You nod. You remember reading about it. An Athenian spring festival where young girls would swing on ropes hung from trees, honoring Erigone and symbolically reenacting her fate. Some say it was a plea to Dionysus to protect their vineyards. Others say it was a guilt offering. Maybe both. You pass through a town next. A sleepy one with sun-bleached shutters and chickens who clearly think they own the place. No temples to Dionysus here. Just a crumbling statue of Apollo and some bored-looking merchants discussing the price of imported myrrh. Dionysus doesn't stop. But child runs up anyway, barefoot, snot-nosed, clutching a sprig of wild fennel. Offers it without a word. Dionysus smiles. Accepts. The cart rolls on. Sometimes, being remembered isn't about grand altars or echoing hymns. Sometimes it's a child handing you a weed because it looked kind of magical. And in that tiny gesture, there's belief, recognition, a spark. You lean back as the wind kicks up dust and laughter in equal parts. You're starting to understand. He's not just the god of wine. He's the god of what happens after. After the cup, after the feast. After the line is crossed and the mask slips. He's what comes next. You wake up in the middle of a vineyard that seems to stretch forever. Its rows etched into the earth like verses of a poem only the grapes can read. The soil is warm beneath your fingertips. Bees hover lazily. Somewhere, someone is playing a reed pipe off key, and it somehow fits the vibe perfectly. Dionysus is already awake, braiding ivy into his hair like it's second nature. You ask if you're still in Greece. He just laughs and says, "Depends who you ask." That's the thing about this next stretch of the journey. It isn't about where you are, but who you meet. Because tonight, it's time to talk about the followers of Dionysus. Not just the occasional worshippers or accidental winemakers, but the true believers, the ones who dance into legend. They're called the Maenads, sometimes the Bacchae, sometimes just those terrifying women in fawn skins. Depends on your mood. You walk through a clearing and suddenly you're in the middle of one of their gatherings. Not a full-blown frenzy. This one's winding down, but the embers of ecstasy still flicker in the way they move, the way they breathe. Their eyes glow with something untamable, like they've tasted some truth and decided never to go back. They're barefoot, smeared with mud and wine, wearing garlands and leopard skins. Some have snakes draped across their shoulders like scarves. One woman offers you a cup and says, "This won't make sense unless you let go of making sense." Then laughs like that was hilarious. You don't drink it. Yet, who were these women, really? That depends. Mainstream scholars suggest Maenads were part of real, ritualistic rites practiced in ancient Greece, especially in the countryside. These rites involve music, dance, and altered states of consciousness, what we now call ecstatic worship. But others believe they were mostly myth, symbols of female liberation, or, depending on who's telling the story, symbols of female hysteria. Fringe theories argue they were suppressed priestesses from pre-Hellenic nature cults, echoing older, more matriarchal religions that got rebranded once the Olympians came to power. What's undeniable? They scared the pants off conservative Greeks. Picture this: women who left their households without permission, who roamed into the woods at night, who danced for hours, screamed, cried, and entered divine trance, who tore animals apart with their bare hands in some stories, though historians still argue whether that was literal or a metaphor for breaking free from domestic roles. You stand at the edge of the swirl of movement and sound, overwhelmed, and then someone grabs your hand. Before you know it, you're dancing. Not gracefully, not even competently, but you're part of it. The rhythm catches your feet like a net. The air turns thick with drum beats and lilac. And somewhere inside you, a knot you didn't know you tied starts to loosen. One woman leans in and whispers, "Do you hear him?" You glance at Dionysus, but she shakes her head. No, him, the one behind the vine. The pulse. You listen harder. And you feel it, not hear, not see, but feel the thump-thump of something old and raw and real. A heartbeat that isn't yours but somehow belongs in your chest. The Maenads nod like they knew you'd find it eventually. Later, they show you the thyrsus, a fennel stalk topped with ivy and a pine cone. It looks like a party prop, but is actually a sacred symbol, equal parts staff, wand, and warning. Scholars still puzzle over it. Some think it was originally a fertility emblem. Others say it was a disguised weapon, a symbol of nature's dual promise. It gives life, and it takes it back. And then there's the music, the pipes, the drums, the endless chant that seems to loop through your bones and back again. Fringe academics call this a form of controlled madness, a socially sanctioned trance state where individuals could temporarily break free from the rigid order of Greek life and re-emerge transformed, a kind of divine therapy, with side effects. One of the Maenads starts talking to you about sparagmos, the ritual dismemberment often associated with Bakshik rites. You flinch. She smiles gently. Not literal. She says, not usually. It's about undoing the self, pulling apart who you were. You stare into the fire and realize this is what Dionysus offers. Not escape, but undoing. Not just fun, but catharsis. A breakdown that clears the ground for something new. Across the clearing, Dionysus meets your eye, and for a moment, you see him differently. Not just a party god. Not just a guy with wine and eyeliner and flair, but a god of transformation, of thresholds, of saying, you don't have to stay small. You sit beside the Maenads as the stars press closer. One braids your hair without asking. Another tells you a story about a king who tried to trap Dionysus in a prison cell, only for the chains to melt into ivy and the guard to break into song. You don't even ask if it's true anymore. You know it is. Just maybe not in the way historians mean. Eventually, the music slows. The Maenads curl up like cats, murmuring in their sleep. You stretch out on the grass. Thyrsus beside you, heart still echoing with that impossible rhythm. And just before sleep takes you, Dionysus whispers, now you're starting to get it. You wake to mist and a headache the size of Mount Olympus. The party's long over. Cups tipped, garlands wilted. Someone's sandal mysteriously lodged in a tree. A lone goat stares at you with the judgmental gaze of someone who definitely did not drink too much sacred wine. Dionysus is sitting on a fallen log, eating grapes like he's never once known consequence. Ready for a history lesson? He asks, already knowing you're not. Still, you sit beside him, because the next stop on your journey isn't just memory. It's a political drama, a myth tangled in questions of power, gender, and what happens when a king decides he knows better than a god. Welcome to Thebes, a city of pride, tradition, clean sandals and clean laws, and home to a man named Pentheus. Now, Pentheus was a young king, smart, charismatic, absurdly full of himself. He believed in order, rules, and sensible tunics. So when Dionysus rolled into town with his Maenads and wild-eyed philosophy, Pentheus was less than thrilled. He called it madness, disruption, a cult, even. This wasn't just about wine. This was about power. The kind of power Dionysus offered messy, sensual, liberating, was exactly the kind that men like Pentheus feared, because it couldn't be cataloged or taxed. You couldn't legislate euphoria. You couldn't put a leash on ecstasy. Pentheus made the classic mistake. He banned the worship of Dionysus in Thebes, shut it down, outlawed the baksheik rites, arrested Maenads, and this part's rich, threw Dionysus himself in jail. Except, oops, jail cells don't work on gods. That same night, the palace shook. Ivy burst through the prison walls. Flames danced harmlessly across the floors. The guards went glassy-eyed and wandered off to recite poetry to tree stumps. When Pentheus demanded answers, Dionysus, still in human form, playing the role of mysterious foreign priest, offered him something better, a peek behind the curtain. He said, "Come, see the Maenads and their sacred rites. See what you fear." Pentheus, being both curious and catastrophically arrogant, agreed. Dionysus even dressed him up for the occasion, in a woman's robe, a wig, a veil. Pentheus hesitated, then let it happen. Some scholars say he was enchanted. Others believe his curiosity simply outweighed his dignity. Historians still argue whether the cross-dressing was meant to shame him or initiate him. Either way, he climbed a tree near the Maenads' ritual site to watch unnoticed. What happened next depends on which version of the myth you prefer. But the gist? The Maenads, in a frenzy of divine madness, saw Pentheus not as a king but as a threat, or a lion, or both. They pulled him from the tree and tore him apart, limb from limb. Leading them was Agave, his own mother, who didn't recognize her son until it was too late. She returned to Thebes, cradling his head, proud of her kill. Then the madness cleared, and grief flooded in. Now you pause here, sitting beside Dionysus in the foggy woods, and ask, why tell this story? He looks at you, grape juice staining his fingertips like old blood. Because, he says, everyone loves freedom until it asks something of them, and everyone thinks they're in control until they're not. This story of Pentheus, the king who refused a god, is one of the most haunting in Greek myth. It's been reinterpreted 1,000 ways. Was it punishment for arrogance? A warning about repressing human instinct? A metaphor for the collapse of patriarchal order under the weight of what it tries to suppress? You reach a small clearing where a tree still stands, gnarled and cracked, said to be the one Pentheus climbed. There's no plaque, no grand memorial, just silence and the faint rustle of leaves that sound eerily like laughter. Dionysus steps forward and lays a single vine at its roots. You do the same. And in that moment, you understand, the story of Pentheus isn't about death. It's about misrecognition, about the danger of refusing to see something for what it really is. Be it a god, a right, a part of yourself. You think back to all the times in history that fear wore the mask of righteousness, when new ideas were dismissed as heresy, when joy was outlawed because it didn't fit into boxes. Thebes paid for that, and so did Pentheus. In the distance, the faint sound of pipes begins again, soft, unhurried, like a lullaby winding its way through centuries. Dionysus doesn't say anything for a long time. Then finally he murmurs, "Not every myth is meant to comfort you." And somehow, that is a kind of comfort. You walk away from Thebes with a strange sense of clarity, like you've stared down something raw and walked through it, not untouched, but unbroken. The fog begins to lift, and the path ahead shimmers with something new, possibility.